For the latest on this fast-moving story, we go live to Bloomberg's Miami bureau chief, Daniel Cancel. So, Dan, what do we know and what don't we know at this time?
Hi, thanks for having me. Thus far, we really only have the Cuban version of the story, which is, as you mentioned, 10 occupants in what they call a speedboat about a mile off the coast, who apparently opened fire first, and the Cuban military returned fire, killing 4, injuring 6. And apparently the 6 were taken to Cuba for medical aid. They haven't released, names, nationalities, or, what they suspected they were up to in terms of the activity. And from the U.S. side, really, thus far, it's been very silent, right? So the Coast Guard is essentially referring comment to state. The White House hasn't commented on this situation either. Here in Florida, the governor's office says that Governor DeSantis was briefed by the Coast Guard, but they haven't issued a statement yet. The AG of the state said they, called for an investigation. So really, a lot more questions still than answers.
Interesting. Dan, we're lucky to have you on this story, and I wonder if you can just zoom out a little bit and paint the political picture in the Caribbean, knowing that the administration has been taking a very tough line against Cuba, suggesting that the government was already failing. We know that oil is not getting in, or gas, and that it's difficult to find a steady source of power. This is clearly a regime that was already teetering. If the U.S. considers this an act of war, what comes next?
Yeah, I mean, thus far, I would tend to think that this, could be more linked to a smuggling operation. We ran kind of the registration, and our reporting shows that it's an older boat, maybe built in 1981, more a fishing boat, and it may indicate that people were either trying to bring goods into Cuba or even ferry people out. Until we get more answers, it's really hard to say. But the backdrop, as you mentioned, it's a tense time, since January 3rd, when the U.S. detained Nicolas Maduro, who was the biggest ally of Cuba. Things have changed dramatically, right? So, Trump's shut off that valve of energy that was going to Cuba to keep the lights on. And he's pressuring other countries to do the same, right, in terms of aid and fuel, including Mexico. And so, the only thing we've seen in recent days is the U.S. is actually now approving energy exports to the private sector, right? Which for the first time, which seems like a new strategy to essentially try to empower, businesses and entrepreneurs on the ground, and weaken the regime.
Well, I guess it's a question of just how weakened the regime really has become, because, of course, President Trump just last month, Daniel, and we can play a soundbite of him saying this, has suggested it could be ready to fall. Take a listen.
Cuba looks like it's ready to fall. I don't know if they can hold out. But Cuba now has no income. They got all of their income from Venezuela, from the Venezuelan oil. They're not getting any of it. And Cuba literally is ready to fall. And you have a lot of great Cuban Americans that are going to be very happy about this.
Dan, do we have a sense of what would come next if that fall indeed comes about?
It's a really good question. One of the big questions amongst, analysts has been, who is the Delcy Rodriguez in Havana, right? So if in Venezuela we got Delcy Rodriguez stepping in for Maduro and now essentially playing nice with the U.S., who is that figure in Cuba? And we don't have a firm answer on that. There are some versions, whether it's the grandson of Raul Castro or a few other players. But until we get better clarity on who's willing to step in and change, this, 6-decade economic, system and political system, repressive system, it's very hard to envision what that looks like next.